Alara Vance's vision tunneled. The fluorescent lights of the pediatric burn unit seemed to pulse, casting long, distorted shadows on the sterile walls. A low, guttural sob echoed from the corner of Lily Connor's room, a sound that clawed at Alara's insides. 8 years old. Third-degree burns across her scalp, forehead, the delicate curve of her cheek. A house fire. Parents gone. Now this. Just moments ago, Dr. Harrison, his face tight with a professional frustration Alara had seen countless times before, had delivered the verdict. Denied. The innovative biosynthetic graft, the one that offered Lily a chance at normalcy, at maybe even growing her own hair again one day, deemed cosmetic by the faceless bureaucrats at the insurance company. The hospital board, equally detached, had echoed the sentiment. Budget constraints. Alara gripped the edge of the metal bedside table, her knuckles white. She looked at Lily, huddled beneath the crisp white sheets, a small island of pain and despair in the vast, indifferent ocean of the hospital. Lily's fingers, scarred but surprisingly nimble, traced the outline of a girl with long, flowing hair in the discarded medical brochure. A single tear escaped Lily's eye, tracing a clean path through the soot-stained skin around it. That tiny tear was a torrent in Alara's heart. There has to be something, Alara had pleaded with Dr. Harrison, her voice barely a whisper. She saw the picture. She had hope. The surgeon had sighed, running a weary hand through his own thinning hair. Alara, I'm a doctor, not a magician. The standard split-thickness graft will cover the area, prevent infection, but it'll be flat, scarred, no hair follicles. It's the best we can do with what we have approved. His gaze flickered towards the closed door, as if the very walls had ears, listening for any deviation from the prescribed path of least financial resistance. But it's not the best for her, Alara countered, the words catching in her throat. She's 8. Her face, her hair, it's part of who she is. Dr. Harrison's expression softened momentarily, a flicker of the empathy that had likely drawn him to medicine in the first place. I know, Alara. Believe me, I know. But my hands are tied. Cynthia Morrow upstairs. She sees dollar signs in every uninsured procedure. Risk assessment, liability, that's all they care about. Cynthia Morrow, the director of nursing and risk management. A woman whose heart seemed to have been replaced by a ledger book. Alara had tangled with her before, over something as minor as an extra blanket for a shivering child whose parents were struggling to pay the heating bill. Morrow's response had been a lecture on resource allocation and the importance of adhering to protocol. Now, Lily's future was being dictated by those same cold, unyielding principles. Alara felt a surge of anger, hot and sharp. It wasn't just unfair. It was a fundamental betrayal of the very reason she had become a nurse, to care, to heal. Not just bodies, but spirits. Later that evening, after her shift officially ended, Alara found herself drawn back to Lily's room. The little girl was awake, staring blankly at the ceiling. The discarded brochure lay crumpled on the floor. Alara sat beside her, taking her small, bandaged hand. Lily didn't flinch, didn't even look at her. Hey, sweetie, Alara said softly. I'm so sorry. Lily remained silent, her gaze fixed on some unseen point above them. Then, slowly, deliberately, she reached for the small, plush doll lying beside her. It had long, blonde, synthetic hair. Lily's scarred fingers fumbled with the strands for a moment, and then, with a sudden, violent motion, she ripped a handful of hair from the doll's head. The sound, though small, echoed in the quiet room like a gunshot. Lily stared at the detached clump of plastic fibers in her hand, then hurled the doll against the opposite wall before curling up into a tight ball, her small body shaking with silent sobs. Alara's breath hitched. That broken doll, that act of despair, was a mirror to Lily's shattered self-image. It was a visceral manifestation of the injustice they were all complicit in. The rules, the protocols, the budget constraints, they were all abstract concepts, but this raw, heartbroken gesture was real. It was a punch to the gut. Back in the cramped, fluorescent-lit nurse's break room, the scent of stale coffee hung heavy in the air. Alara stared into the reflection of her own tired face in the microwave door. Her hair, long and thick, a cascade of light brown that reached halfway down her back, seemed to mock her. It was healthy, vibrant, whole. Everything Lily's was not. Brenda Kowalski, a veteran nurse whose cynicism was a shield against the daily onslaught of human suffering and bureaucratic idiocy, watched Alara with a knowing look. "You've got that I'm about to do something stupid look on your face, kid," she said, her voice rough but not unkind. Alara didn't answer. Her gaze remained fixed on her reflection. Her hair, the same color, or close enough, to what Lily's had been in the picture. Dr. Harrison had mentioned the difficulty in obtaining viable scalp tissue for grafting. Autografts were ideal, but Lily's donor sites were limited. Allografts required tissue banks, matching, and were often rejected. A crazy, impossible thought sparked in Alara's mind, a desperate ember in the darkness. Her own hair. It wasn't scalp tissue, she knew that. The science of follicle transplantation was complex. But it was something. It was protein, it was structure, it was her. A directed donation, she thought, the words echoing the sterile language of the hospital, twisting it into something deeply personal. "Don't even think about it, Alara," Brenda warned, her voice sharper now. "You pull some stunt, Morrow will have your license before you can say Hippocratic oath. This place chews up idealists like you and spits them out." Alara heard Brenda's warning, the years of hard-won experience behind it. But the image of Lily's small, shaking form, the violent act against the doll, was a brand on her soul. The rules, the fear of reprisal, the potential consequences, they all faded into the background, drowned out by the fierce, unwavering conviction that she had to do something, anything. The idea was terrifying in its audacity, a blatant disregard for every rule she had ever been taught. But beneath the fear, a strange sense of calm settled over her. This wasn't about her career, her future. It was about a little girl who had lost everything, and a system that was determined to deny her even the smallest sliver of hope. At 3 a.m., the silence in Alara's small apartment was absolute, broken only by the rhythmic tick of the cheap clock on her nightstand. The fluorescent light above the bathroom mirror cast a harsh, unflattering glow on her face. She looked at her reflection, at the long, thick braid that snaked over her shoulder. It had been years in the growing, a tangible representation of her femininity, her identity. A pair of blunt medical scissors lay on the counter, salvaged from a discarded hospital supply kit. Her hands trembled slightly as she picked them up. She thought of her mother, her gentle fingers brushing through her hair as a child, the quiet lull of stories whispered before bedtime. This felt like a betrayal of that memory, a severing of something precious. With a deep breath, Alara pulled her hair into a tight ponytail at the nape of her neck. She measured roughly where she thought the length would be most useful, a visual approximation based on Lily's burn area. The first snip of the scissors was surprisingly loud in the stillness of the apartment, a sharp, decisive sound that echoed the finality of her decision. She didn't hesitate, didn't allow herself a moment of doubt. One snip followed another, until the thick, severed ponytail lay heavy in her hand, a tangible weight of sacrifice. Short, uneven strands framed her face. She looked stark, almost severe, but in her eyes there was a flicker of fierce determination. Dawn was just beginning to paint the sky in hues of pale pink and gray when Alara arrived at St. Jude's. Her scrub cap was pulled low, concealing the drastic change. She moved with a quiet urgency, her heart pounding against her ribs. Lily was scheduled for the standard grafting surgery this morning. Alara slipped into the pre-operative prep room, the air thick with the antiseptic smell of betadine. Dr. Harrison's instrument tray lay neatly arranged. With trembling hands, she retrieved a sterile biotransport bag from the supply cabinet, a small act of defiance in itself. She carefully placed her severed ponytail inside, sealing the bag with meticulous care. On a small piece of sterile gauze, she wrote a brief, heartfelt message in shaky handwriting. "For Lily, a directed donation. It's sterile. Don't let it go to waste." She folded the gauze and placed it on top of the bag on Dr. Harrison's tray, a silent plea in the cold, sterile environment. Alara was just starting her regular shift at the nurse's station when Dr. Harrison stormed out of the scrubbing area, his face a thundercloud. He spotted her immediately, his eyes blazing with a mixture of disbelief and fury. He grabbed her arm, pulling her roughly into a nearby empty supply closet, the door swinging shut behind them with a soft thud. "Are you insane?" he hissed, his voice low and tight with barely suppressed rage. "Do you have any idea what you've done? This is not some goddamn arts and crafts project, Alara. This is medicine. This is an unvetted, unsanctioned, rogue biological sample. I could have my license suspended for even touching this." He held up the biotransport bag as if it were a biohazard. Alara stood her ground, her own fear warring with the conviction that she had done the right thing. She lifted her chin slightly, meeting his furious gaze. "Is it viable, doctor?" she asked, her voice surprisingly steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Can you use it to help her?" The simple, direct question seemed to deflate his anger momentarily. He stared at her, really looked at her, and his eyes fell to the edges of her scrub cap, where the telltale signs of her drastically shortened hair were visible. A flicker of understanding, perhaps even reluctant admiration, crossed his face, quickly masked by professional apprehension. He was a doctor, a healer, bound by oaths and regulations. But he was also a human being who had witnessed Lily's despair. The raw material he needed, the very thing he had lamented the lack of, was right here. He didn't answer her question directly. He just stared at the bag in his hand, then back at Alara, a silent battle raging within him. Finally, with a frustrated sigh that seemed to carry the weight of his internal conflict, he turned and strode back towards the operating room, clutching the bag tightly, leaving Alara standing alone in the supply closet, her heart pounding, the silence amplifying the enormity of what she had done. Hours crawled by, each tick of the clock in the nurse's station an agonizing reminder of the potential consequences of her actions. Alara paced nervously, her anxiety a tangible thing. Brenda found her near the end of the shift, her expression unreadable. "Harrison did it," Brenda said, her voice flat. Ilara's breath hitched. He used it?" Brenda nodded slowly. "Modified the procedure, used your donation for the micrografting portion. Said it was surprisingly viable. The initial results looked promising. A wave of relief, so profound it almost buckled her knees, washed over Alara. Tears welled in her eyes. She had done it. Against all odds, against all the rules, she had given Lily a chance. But Brenda's next words shattered the fragile peace. "Morrow knows Alara. Someone from the OR team?" They talked. "She's been asking questions all morning. She wants to see you, now." Brenda's gaze was filled with grim resignation. "Brace yourself, kid. The storm's coming." Cynthia Morrow's office felt colder than usual, the air thick with unspoken accusations. Dr. Harrison stood beside her large, imposing desk, his posture stiff, his gaze fixed somewhere over Alara's shoulder. Morrow didn't offer Alara a seat. She simply slid a thick file across the polished surface, Alara's personnel file. "What you did, Nurse Vance," Morrow began, her voice icy and devoid of any warmth, "was not an act of compassion. It was an act of breathtaking arrogance. A reckless, irresponsible, and frankly, illegal act." She didn't even make eye contact, her attention fixed on the damning contents of the file. "You violated numerous hospital protocols, including patient safety regulations, biohazard handling procedures, and you engaged in willful insubordination. You coerced a surgeon into performing an unauthorized and potentially dangerous procedure. You have exposed this hospital to an unimaginable level of liability. I helped a child who," Alara began, her voice trembling slightly, but Morrow cut her off with a sharp wave of her hand. "You did not help a child, Nurse Vance." Morrow's voice rose, a hint of triumph in her tone. "You satisfied your own misguided sense of heroism. You endangered a vulnerable patient and jeopardized the careers of your colleagues. This hospital operates under strict guidelines for a reason. Your impulsive and frankly bizarre actions have undermined those guidelines and created a dangerous precedent." She finally looked up, her gaze like shards of ice. "Therefore, you are hereby suspended, effective immediately, pending a full review by the State Licensing Board, to whom we will be recommending the permanent revocation of your nursing license. As of this moment, your employment at St. Jude's General Hospital is terminated." The words hit Alara like a physical blow, stealing the air from her lungs. Her career, her passion, gone, just like that, for trying to help a little girl. The injustice of it was staggering. "You'll need to clear out your locker immediately," Morrow continued, her voice cold and businesslike, as if she were discussing a routine administrative matter. To add insult to injury, she picked up her phone. "Security? Please escort Miss Vance from the premises." The walk of shame through the hospital corridors was surreal. The security guards, their expressions a mixture of embarrassment and duty, flanked her on either side. Staff members stopped what they were doing to stare, their faces a blend of curiosity, pity, and perhaps even fear. She made brief eye contact with Dr. Harrison, who quickly averted his gaze, a flush creeping up his neck. The weight of their disapproval, of the system's condemnation, pressed down on her. Outside the hospital entrance, Morrow, wanting to ensure her point was driven home, had called the local police. Officer Miller, a young patrolman with kind eyes and a slightly bewildered expression, arrived to take a report. Morrow, with a self-righteous indignation that Alara found nauseating, accused her of theft of hospital supplies, the bio-transport bag, and creating a hazardous situation. Officer Miller listened patiently to both sides of the story, his brow furrowed. "Ma'am," he said to Alara, his voice gentle, "let me just clarify. You cut off your own hair to try and help a burn victim, and for that, the hospital is—" "What exactly are they alleging?" "Theft," Morrow interjected sharply. "Violation of protocol, endangering a patient." Alara's voice wavered as she explained her actions, the desperation that had driven her, the hope she had felt when Brenda told her the surgery had been successful. Officer Miller looked from the distraught young woman, her scrub cap barely concealing her uneven haircut, to the imposing facade of the hospital behind them. He sighed softly. "Ma'am," he said to Alara, "I have to file a report based on the complaint, but, I'll be honest, this is a first for me." He took her information, his manner respectful. He didn't handcuff her, didn't even put her in the back of his patrol car. "I think," he added quietly, almost as an afterthought, "you might want to speak to a lawyer." Brenda was waiting for Alara outside the police station, her face a mask of fury. "That witch!" she exclaimed, pulling Alara into a tight hug. "I told Maria. That Sanchez girl, the blogger, she's got connections. She's going to run with this." Brenda met Maria Sanchez at a local coffee shop later that day, speaking in hushed tones, her voice thick with righteous anger. She recounted the entire story, omitting Alara's name initially to protect her. She painted a vivid picture of Lily's suffering, Morrow's cold indifference, and Alara's selfless act of desperation. "They didn't fire her for breaking a rule," Brenda said, her voice trembling. "They fired her for showing them up, for proving that one person with a good heart and a pair of scissors has more humanity than their entire damn administration." Maria's eyes widened as Brenda spoke. This wasn't just a local story. It was a human interest narrative with the potential to ignite public outrage. She thanked Brenda profusely and promised to look into it. The resulting blog post exploded across the internet like wildfire. "Hero nurse fired, faces police action after donating own hair to save burn victim," the headline screamed. The story detailed Lily's plight, the insurance denial, Alara's desperate act, and Morrow's ruthless response. Brenda's anonymous quotes added a layer of insider credibility and raw emotional impact. Within hours, justice for Nurse Alara was trending on every social media platform. The comment sections of news articles and blog posts filled with outrage and support for Alara. People shared their own stories of battling heartless healthcare bureaucracies. The narrative quickly shifted from Alara's individual case to a broader indictment of a system that seemed to prioritize profit over people. St. Jude's Hospital's official response, released late that night, only fanned the flames. A cold, corporate statement reiterated their commitment to patient safety and established medical protocols, vaguely alluding to an ongoing investigation into an employee's unprofessional conduct. It was exactly the kind of tone-deaf, legalistic jargon that infuriated the public even further. Alara, meanwhile, was holed up in her darkened apartment, her phone buzzing incessantly with notifications she couldn't bring herself to read. She saw snippets of the online fury, the supportive messages, the hateful comments from anonymous trolls, the hospital's sterile denials. A formal letter arrived from the state nursing board, confirming her suspension and the initiation of a license review. She felt adrift, lost in a sea of public opinion she hadn't sought. Jobless, facing potential legal action, her career in ruins, the weight of it all was crushing. But the online storm continued to gather momentum. A GoFundMe campaign, started by Maria Sanchez to help Alara with legal fees and living expenses, went viral, raising hundreds of thousands of dollars in a matter of hours. Mainstream news outlets picked up the story, sending reporters flocking to Alara's small apartment building and camping outside St. Jude's. Other nurses, emboldened by Alara's story, began sharing their own harrowing experiences with bureaucratic red tape and the constant pressure to cut costs, often at the expense of patient care, using the healthcare heroes and patients over profit hashtags. The narrative was no longer just about one young nurse. It had become a national conversation about the soul of healthcare. Outside St. Jude's, small groups of protesters began to gather, holding hastily made signs bearing Alara's name and slogans demanding justice. The hospital's online ratings plummeted, with hundreds of one-star reviews flooding their Yelp and Google pages, accusing them of heartlessness and greed. The carefully constructed image of St. Jude's as a beacon of healing was rapidly crumbling under the weight of public outrage. In his sprawling, minimalist mansion nestled in the Hollywood Hills, Julian Croft, the world-renowned celebrity hairstylist, was feeling a familiar pang of ennui. He scrolled through his Instagram feed, a curated stream of flawless faces and fleeting trends, feeling increasingly disconnected from anything real. Then, he saw it. A screenshot of Maria Sanchez's blog post, shared by a friend in the industry who was usually immune to such viral fluff. The grainy photograph accompanying the article showed a young woman, her face etched with exhaustion and a quiet dignity, being escorted out of a hospital by security guards. Her scrub cap was askew, revealing the choppy, uneven ends of her drastically shortened hair. Julian, a man who had built a global empire on the artistry of hair, on creating illusions of perfection, was unexpectedly arrested by the image. It wasn't styled, it wasn't glamorous, but it possessed a raw, visceral beauty. He read the caption, the story of the nurse who had sacrificed her own hair for a child she barely knew, only to be punished for her compassion. A jolt of something akin to shame, mixed with a powerful surge of inspiration, ran through him. He spent his days crafting artifice, while this young woman had made a profound, selfless sacrifice of a piece of her very being. It was the most punk rock, authentic, beautiful haircut he had ever witnessed. It wasn't about vanity, it was about love. Without a second thought, Julian grabbed his phone. He instructed his personal assistant to clear his schedule for the next few days, find out everything they could about Alara Vance, and have the private jet fueled and ready to depart for wherever she was. He made a few quick calls to his publicist and his foundation director. Then, he posted a single, enigmatic message on his Instagram account, which boasted tens of millions of followers. True beauty isn't styled, it's sacrificed. On my way to meet a real artist. The internet immediately exploded with speculation. Meanwhile, back in Alara's city, the board of directors at St. Jude's Hospital was locked in an emergency meeting, the atmosphere thick with panic and recrimination. The public relations disaster was spiraling out of control. Major donors were threatening to withdraw their funding. The hospital was facing scrutiny from regulatory agencies and mounting legal challenges. Cynthia Morrow, pale but defiant, stood before the board, rigidly defending her actions, her voice tight with barely concealed fear. She reiterated the importance of protocol, the potential liabilities, the necessity of maintaining order. But her arguments, which had once held sway, now sounded hollow and self-serving in the face of the overwhelming public outcry. Then, Dr. Harrison was called in. Subpoenaed by the board, he could no longer afford to remain silent. He spoke with a quiet but firm conviction, his earlier apprehension replaced by a sense of moral obligation. He confirmed the details of Alara's actions, the initial success of the modified surgery, and stated unequivocally that while her methods were unconventional and outside of protocol, her intent was purely altruistic, and the outcome, thus far, positive. He admitted that in a system often constrained by bureaucracy and financial considerations, Alara had acted with a degree of compassion that transcended the limitations of their established procedures. His testimony was the turning point. The board members, their faces grim, finally understood the depth of the public's anger and the severity of their own misjudgment. By the end of the meeting, the decision was made. Cynthia Morrow was relieved of her duties, her rigid adherence to protocol ironically leading to her own downfall. Alara, still reeling from the loss of her job and the unexpected glare of public attention, was hiding in her apartment, the blinds drawn against the intrusive world outside. A hesitant knock on the door startled her. She peered through the peephole, expecting another reporter or perhaps a process server. Instead, she saw a man who looked utterly out of place in the drab hallway, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, radiating an almost otherworldly charisma. It was Julian Croft. He smiled, a genuine, warm smile that somehow put her at ease despite her apprehension. "Alara Vance?" he asked, his voice surprisingly gentle. "I'm Julian Croft. I think what you did was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. Can I come in?" Alara, stunned into momentary speechlessness, could only nod and open the door. Julian stepped into her modest living room, the stark simplicity of the space, a sharp contrast to his polished appearance. He didn't offer platitudes or empty sympathy. He spoke to her with a profound respect, his eyes filled with an almost reverent admiration. He told her how deeply moved he had been by her story, by her selfless act. "You lost your job," he said, his voice low and sincere. "Not because you did something wrong, but because you have a gift for empathy, for genuine human connection, that your bosses couldn't quantify on a spreadsheet. Your hands don't just administer medicine, Alara. They offer hope. And that," he added, his gaze direct and unwavering, "is a rare and precious thing." He didn't just offer her money from the rapidly growing GoFundMe campaign, though his own foundation had also made a significant contribution. He offered her a new purpose, a new beginning. "I want to build something," he explained, his eyes alight with a vision. "Something that honors that spirit, that recognizes the true meaning of care. Not another hospital, bound by rules and regulations that stifle compassion, but a haven." He outlined his plan. He wanted to open a high-end salon and wellness center right here in her city. A place that would offer not just superficial beauty treatments, but a holistic approach to well-being. And he wanted to name it Vance. He explained that a significant percentage of all profits would go directly into a newly established charitable foundation, Lily's Fund, dedicated to providing financial assistance for children from low-income families who needed non-essential but life-changing medical procedures, the kind of procedures that insurance companies often deemed cosmetic. And he wanted Alara to run the foundation. "This isn't just about giving you a job, Ilara," Julian emphasized, his voice earnest. "It's about giving you a platform, a chance to continue the work you started, but on a much larger scale, to create a ripple effect of compassion." Alara listened, tears streaming down her face, tears not of sadness or despair, but of overwhelming disbelief and gratitude. It was too much, too fast. Just days ago, her life had been crumbling around her. Now, this stranger, this icon of the superficial world, was offering her a chance to rebuild it in a way she could never have imagined. 3 months later, the grand opening of Vance was a momentous occasion. The salon, located in a beautifully renovated historic building, was a haven of light and tranquility, a world away from the sterile environment of St. Jude's. It was packed with local dignitaries, journalists, community members, and well-wishers, all eager to witness the culmination of an extraordinary story. Ilara, her shorn hair now styled into a chic pixie cut courtesy of Julian himself, stood confidently at a small podium, a radiant smile gracing her lips. In the front row, beaming, sat Lily Connor with her new foster family. The scars on her scalp were still visible, but tiny sprouts of new hair were beginning to emerge, a testament to the success of the unconventional graft. Beside Lily sat a humbled Dr. Harrison and a beaming Brenda Kowalski. Even Officer Miller, off-duty and in plain clothes, was there, offering Alara a warm, encouraging smile. As Alara began to speak, her voice clear and strong, images flashed across a large screen behind her. Lily in her hospital bed, Alara cutting her hair, the viral news articles, the protests outside St. Jude's. "They say you should always follow the rules," Alara's voice echoed through the beautifully appointed salon, "but I learned that sometimes the most important rules are the ones written on your heart. I learned that true healing isn't always found in textbooks or protocols, but in the simple act of seeing someone else's pain and saying, 'I'm here, I care.'" Her gaze swept across the room, landing on Lily. "This place, this foundation, it's for every child like Lily who deserves a chance at a full and happy life, regardless of their circumstances. It's for every nurse, every caregiver who has ever felt constrained by a system that values profit over people." Ilara stepped away from the podium and knelt down to embrace Lily, who threw her small arms around Alara's neck. Julian Croft, standing nearby, watched the scene unfold, a quiet sense of fulfillment on his face. The camera lingered on the elegant sign above the entrance of the salon. Vance, shining brightly, a symbol of sacrifice, resilience, and the transformative power of human compassion.